we will get started. And before we get started with the presentation, one of the things that I want to ask you guys is oftentimes when we hear about conflict resolution, the first thing that comes to mind is I'm going to think about a time when somebody did something to me that made me angry, right? That's like what we think about. But during the course of this, just the next 30 minutes or so, I would just ask that you maybe think about when this applies to you when you were on the opposite end of the conflict. In other words, maybe you were the one that was causing it. Because a lot of conflict resolution isn't just looking at the other person, it's looking at you and what you're doing to cause the conflict. So, how many of you guys have ever had thoughts like this? My colleague and I should be working on this together, but he interrupted me again. This is his way of showing me that he's the boss. He made me look bad in front of somebody else. I've been replaying this over and over in my head. Have you guys ever had a thought like that? Or someone has told me, someone has to tell my direct report that he has a bad attitude and it's affecting the rest of the team, and I'm dreading doing that. Or maybe I know what you're going to say, they don't have resources and there's no need to ask. Do any of these excuses sound familiar with why you're not going to deal with conflict? Right? Oh, there you go. What you talking about, Foo? Okay, that is, I'm so sorry. It's the problem with mirroring in technology. But anyhow, one of the things that we do when it comes to conflict, and you know what? I'm going to just turn that off because I don't think it's going to be helpful at this point. I think it's going to be more distracting, okay? One of the things that we do when we deal with conflict is we make excuses on why we're not going to deal with it. And the problem with that is something else happens and something else happens, and then all of a sudden you just become super angry, and the tiniest thing in the whole entire world is what causes everything to blow up, right? So we're going to walk through a little bit of why you guys don't like conflict, and then at the end talk about what you can do to resolve it, right? Isn't that why we're here? Figure out how to handle it? Okay. So my first question to you all is, why don't you like conflict? Okay, makes things awkward. What else? Complicated, awkward.
It's a time drain. I mean, it's like, I don't want to deal with it. I don't have time to deal with it. I have too many other things to do.
So you just push it aside. Okay. Are you productive when you've got massive conflict going on in your workplace? Do you find yourselves going around and maybe talking to somebody else about the conflict that's going on, or maybe people come to you and talk about conflict? Right, and as you guys are discussing that conflict, are you guys being productive? Right. And the problem with conflict is that we all tend to get involved and we don't like it, but instead of addressing it, we go and we talk to everybody else. Some other things that I would kind of remind you and why we don't like conflict is oftentimes I have found that people do not engage with other people that they're conflicted with because we're taught to play nice in the sandbox, right? And we grew up, if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. And oftentimes when we look at conflict, we're like, oh, I don't want to go tell Jessica that she made me really angry when, or whatever that case is. And then the second thing of why we make excuses oftentimes is just because we don't know how to handle conflict. If you don't know how to ride a bike, you're not going to hop on it, right? So you're not going to hop with conflict. What's been some experiences in the workplace or outside of the workplace where you found that conflict exists? Like, what's caused conflict? Okay, personalities. That's a great one. Different levels of management. Okay, would you say that that's like, maybe there's some politics, and I don't mean negative politics, but like miscommunications that go on and different priorities? Okay.
I think also, like, our organization's been going through a transition where we've had like a lot of new people in, and it's kind of a flux. Wouldn't you say that's a good word? Just lots of different changes, and so I think everyone just being on the same page and kind of where are we and what, you know what I mean, like what's going on and that kind of thing.
Interesting. So oftentimes change.
Yeah, that would be the right word for it, right? Change. Oh, a lot of change.
Things are changing. So keep in mind, if you have an understanding of where conflict comes from, a lot of times you can begin to see it in its early stages. So you guys mentioned very, very, very good places that conflict comes from. When you guys talk about change, a lot of times conflict can come from not having a clear vision, goals, or desired outcomes, right? If you come into work and you don't know what you're doing, or you have a team and you're not telling them what to do, how can they have a clear understanding of why they're here and what they're doing? Another cause of conflict can be misinformation, right? You think something's going on, and then Joe tells you something else is going on, and then all of a sudden you're just like, whatever, I don't even know what's going on. Relationships, and that's the personalities that Winnie talked about, can happen, and that is that there's just a conflict between two personalities. Also, work ethic. Can you guys think of a time when maybe you worked a little bit harder than that person sitting next to you? And I'll bet you one of you leaves feeling great and the other one doesn't, right? Right, that can be very, very frustrating as you pour in your heart and soul, and then you see somebody that you don't think that they're pulling their weight or whatever. And then finally, another really big piece of conflict is priorities, when you have conflicting priorities. And a lot of times that happens when change is going on. So we've kind of talked about this, but I want to ask you more directly, what are some of the negative impacts of conflict in the workplace? Like, why do we care? Like, why should you even care about resolving conflict?
Well, I think because it's a time drain, right?
And we spend too much time here. But you can move on.
Oh,
I mean, we're here.
we're here for a big chunk of our life, really, in a lot of ways. So if you're going and you're here and you're conflicting all the time,
It's not healthy.
it's not enjoyable, it's not healthy. So.
Right. And here's an interesting, I think this is actually a fascinating fact. The effects of conflict in the workplace are widespread and costly. Its prevalence, as shown by 3 serious case studies, show that 24 to 60% of management time and energy is spent dealing with anger. This leads to decreased productivity, increased stress among employees, hampered performance, high turnover rate, absenteeism, and at its worst, violence and death. And here's the thing, is I know that when you guys hear that, you guys think, oh my gosh, well that sure is a dramatic quote. But what I will tell you is that in September, my organization is actually launching a Healthy Workplace campaign where we're going to tell the story about somebody that did decide that the stress was too much and took his life. And so and please don't hear me say that that's what's going on in all organizations, but it is something most certainly, it's kind of a big deal. Like, it's kind of a big deal. And a lot of time and energy management, 60% spent. On on handling conflict. So, if you guys could imagine a world without conflict here at work, what would that look like? Like, I can't even imagine such a place.
Well, I think, you'd be able to have those, like, I guess, candid conversations that wouldn't, like, leave feeling hurt and, you could just say, okay, here's my issue, how can we work through it? I mean, I guess that would be what it would look like, right? Everybody's gonna have feelings, you're always gonna hurt people, knowing how to approach people the right way so that feelings don't get hurt.
And you have to take into account individual personality types. I mean, because some people can have a direct conversation, and others will be,
Yeah, like Kathy, she's really thin-skinned, so like if you say anything, she bursts into tears.
Yes, that is me.
Right from that response, I can clearly see that was true.
So I think too, we have, I just see it. Instead of going to the person you have the conflict, everybody else hears it except for that person is probably the last one to hear it.
Mhm. Yes. And then sometimes do you find yourself in the telephone game, like, this is the source of the conflict, and then by the time the person that actually was involved in the conflict, it's like the story doesn't even make sense anymore? Yeah. It's always a little bit awkward. Yes. Sorry, I'm thinking of a very specific example of that. So if you were able to better manage conflict, can you guys see that there'd be a boost in morale?
Yeah, I think so.
Another reason to manage conflict could be to minimize politics and confusion. Decrease mitigation or litigation. That a lot of time, or mitigate litigation, that's hopefully never happening, but that's always, can be a possibility. Increase employee retention, right? For every person that you lose, it costs an organization 1.5 times their salary to replace. For every single person that you use.
Well, I mean, if you think about just time, like right now, the reason we have, like roughly 20 plus employees in this building that would normally be here, but we're replacing a person, and everybody that's not here is in a meeting about that to interview the people and to, so if you just, like right then, like right there, that's that example.
Training time, your HR's time, or whoever your hiring manager's time is. How about the fact of any type of overtime that has to be worked or tasks that aren't getting done? A lot of times management wants to see hard numbers, right? Like I want to see that my profit and loss statement, and we don't think of turnover as being a hard number, but 1.5 times the salary of the person you're hiring or that let go. That's, again, amazing to me. Increased productivity is another great reason to manage conflict. And then the final one is just to help to foster a healthy organization. Work is work, right? I mean, not everybody needs to love their job and think that it's their calling and the best thing ever. But when you at least are able to come to work and leave work here when you go home, that really can help with your life balance and actually focusing on things that you enjoy doing.
Instead of taking the conflict home, you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how many times do you over and over and over in your head, or you go home and you talk to your husband or your spouse and you're like, oh my gosh, you're not even going to believe what happened. Yeah. So we're going to get ready to move into how we can help resolve conflict, but do you guys have any questions or comments right now before I launch into that? Okay. So, what I'm about to tell you before we move into, I guess we're not on the screen. Before we move into how to manage conflict is a tool that if you only take one thing from this hour, just one, this is what I'm going to ask you to take. Because it can help you not just in resolving conflict here, it can help you with regards to resolving conflict anywhere. So just this is the only thing, and you can stop listening to me after this one thing. How many times when you guys are thinking about conflict, you say to yourself, oh my gosh, Jessica made me so angry when? Or Kathy made me so frustrated? Or Whitney makes me feel inadequate? Like, do you guys ever say those types of things when you're thinking about conflict? Yeah. Right, totally in your head.
No, out loud.
Sometimes we say it out loud, but like in your head.
You're like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated because this person, I think I would say probably everybody does.
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. The next time you find yourself getting frustrated, I want you to remember that you have complete control over your emotions. And you can't change how Kathy acts or how Jessica acts or how Courtney acts. You can't. But you can control how you react to it. So anytime you find yourself saying, oh, Jessica makes me so angry when, instead, start the conversation by saying, I allow myself to get angry when. I allow myself to get whatever when this happens. Because here's the thing, no matter what techniques and tools I give you or you learn on down the road, if you are going into a conversation to resolve conflict thinking that you're going to change that person's mind, you can only control how you act. And I'm going to challenge you to remember that the next time you get frustrated and say it, I promise you it works. Oh my gosh, and it's the most empowering feeling ever because you're also taking away their power to make you angry, right? So anyhow, just remember that. I'm going to get off my soapbox now about you taking control of your own emotions. So what are some traditional techniques that you hear with regards to resolving conflict? Okay, confronting head on.
Ignoring it, it'll go away.
Okay. Pick your
Polar
battles.
opposite, but yeah.
Right. So we're either going to, right. How many of you guys have heard those feeling statements? Like you're supposed to say, Jessica, when you do this, it makes me feel. Right? I think they are.
Child psychology. Use your words.
Use your
what I always
words.
tell my nephews. Use your words.
Right. Some of the traditional and effective ways to resolve conflict are just little tidbits that I would give you is to focus on results rather than activities, particularly in the workplace, right? When this happens, then we're all here until 8 o'clock or whatever the case is. And that's another phrase. I will tell you honestly, when I resolve conflict or when I have to deal with it, I have what I call perfect phrases. And the reason is because when you're uncomfortable with something, if you have a script, then it just helps you get those words out. So focus on results rather than activities. When this happens, then whatever the consequences. The next thing is be engaged, truthful, and open. This can be difficult, but recognize that it's not me versus Jessica, but instead we actually all do work for the same organization. So let's at least figure out how we can try to align. Totally easier said than done. A lot of times, if you're having a difficult time resolving conflict, I see that you've got your strategic plan and your vision, mission, and values back there. A lot of times, you go back to the organizational goals, right? I mean, sometimes you need a mediator, and if you're here to work, then fine, what's our vision, and how are we going to make sure that we're supporting that through our activities? Move away from niceties. Like, you don't need to have a confrontational attitude. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to be personal. But oftentimes when you're trying to resolve conflict, have you guys heard about the sandwich compliment? Okay, so if you...
Kathy must have had that in a different workplace.
If you have to give, if you're in management or you have to give feedback, what they'll tell you is say something nice, then give them the constructive feedback, and then say something else nice, right? So Jessica, you do such a great job of handling clients. I really wish you could work at being here on time. Just so you know, you do a great job organizing your email. Oh my God. What did she just hear?
She does a great job.
Yes, 2 times. So being on time or whatever it was I told her that you needed to work on.
Yeah.
Right, she did. Really? Why did she? I gave her 2 compliments. In other words, when I talk about niceties, that's always the example that comes to mind. Don't sugarcoat it. I'm going to go in and give him a compliment and then I'm going to resolve it. No. Just remember what you're there for, and that's to resolve the conflict. So, these next ones are my favorites ever. That's why I saved them for the last, because I find these to be the most effective. And the truth be told is a lot of ways to help you all use your own unique personality to help resolve conflicts, right? As you guys have mentioned, personalities are huge. And I'm hoping that one of these techniques that I'll give you, you'll walk away going, that's how I'm going to handle conflict. So the first thing that you're going to do is stay focused on the most essential objectives. Sometimes people get off subject and start focusing on stuff that doesn't matter. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what your objective is and how you're trying to resolve it. So what did I just say? Yes. Yes. Have you guys been in those conversations and it's a huge rabbit hole? I mean, like, you're talking about time and attendance and absenteeism, and by the time it's all said and done, you're sitting there fighting over who won the 1985 World Series, right? Like, we allow ourselves to go down those rabbit holes. So whatever your objective is, that's all you're going to talk about. That's all you're going to talk about. The next thing, pick your battles. Don't fight over things that don't matter. Sometimes when we are agitated, and oftentimes we're agitated at a person, so whatever that person says, we're not going to like, right? And so make sure that as you're trying to decide where you're going to spend your energy and what battles you're going to fight, that it really matters. We all want to win, but sometimes we focus on winning so much that it doesn't even matter what we're winning for. I'm going to pick on Jessica yet again, sorry. But you know, can you think of a time when somebody that you have conflict with maybe has had an idea in a meeting and you immediately don't like it? Right. So Jessica says, I think everybody should get a $25,000 raise. And you guys are, well, that's ridiculous. Jessica came up with it.
Actually, everybody go like, yes.
Right? But I mean, like, just because Jessica came up with it, it's like, I don't like that idea. I'm not going to do that. So again, does it matter? Does it matter? And sometimes that's just a basic question. Does this matter to me? And if the answer is no, then move on. Move on. The next thing that I would recommend to do is build an empathetic understanding of the other person's point of view. And oh my God, I mean, really try to do this. This is hard, right? It's hard to find where the other person's coming from when there's conflict involved. But here's the deal. Don't you wish that sometimes people would take the time to hear where you're coming from? Yeah. So offer them that same service. Ask them to explain their view and make sure you don't leave that conversation until you understand why they're upset. You don't have to agree with it, but you do need to at least understand. So how many of you all have found yourself in a situation where you were the cause of conflict? Hi. And can you think of a situation when you were the cause of conflict and the end result of that was somebody that was just hurt? Feelings were hurt or whatever. I wouldn't even have noticed unless you went, shh. But sometimes that happens, right? Like, we hurt somebody's feelings. And I know that work is supposed to be work, but hey, it happens. So I am going to share with you all an incredibly effective tool that I use when we are dealing with hurt feelings from conflict. So if Jessica and if I have hurt Jessica's feelings for whatever reason, and it comes out as I'm seeking to understand, trying to be empathetic, that I really was the cause of that, then the best thing that I can do is set up a 15-minute conversation with Jessica off the floor. Do not do it at your cube. Do not do it in the hallway. Do not do it over drinks. Do it off the floor. And all I'm going to say to her is, Jessica, I want to give you an opportunity to tell me how you feel. And I'm just going to sit here and own it. And you just sit there and you let them tell you whatever it is that they're going to tell you. And the only things that you are allowed to say is, I understand where you're coming from, and thanks. That's all. You don't defend. You don't do anything. You just listen. And I will tell you that when hurt feelings are involved, I have used that technique over and over, and it has never not resolved the issue. Because really what you're saying is, I care enough about you to listen to what you're saying and own up to what I did. So, just keep that in mind. Sometimes you hear a lot, and sometimes it's hard to not say but it is incredibly powerful. The next thing, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I just want you to know, before I give this quote, I did ask Jessica if the language was okay, so blame her if you're offended. But Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, said, it's probably better to have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. Right?
I didn't think that'd be too offensive.
Well, you never know, right? We tend to avoid that we don't like, right? And now, while I'm not advocating that you guys go and create some sort of like covert operation to be fake friends with people, you can't really have any idea what they're thinking if you choose to avoid them. So sometimes it's just easier to build the relationship with them. Now, let me tell you how, right? Because I see, oh God, no, I'm not going to be friends with Jessica, sorry. We go way back, and she's the only one that I feel safe, like, in this room, picking on, right. So first of all, if you're actually trying to build a relationship with somebody that you don't like, I will tell you the effort is worthwhile in the long run. And here's the biggest reason. Think about how much time and energy you spend thinking about that person that you don't like. We have a finite amount of energy. And when we choose to spend it on focusing on people that we don't like and that conflict, we're taking away from the positive stuff that we could be focusing on. That's just how it is. So that's why I recommend you try to mitigate those negative relationships. So the first thing that you're going to do when you're trying to build this relationship is you're going to figure out what your role is in the conflict. You have one, I promise you do. So figure out what it is. The next thing is I would recommend that you guys have a conversation where you hit the reset button, right? So I'm going to go up to Kathy and say, hey, look, here's the deal. This is what's happened. That's what's going on. Can we please start over? Can we please hit reset? Because here's the thing, is what that does is it's you all agreeing that from here on out, whatever the conflict is it's been the best that you can forgotten. And then that's going to allow you a clean slate to resolve going forward. The next thing is think about a change in dynamic. If you don't change your behavior, then the relationship's going to stay the same. Think about keeping a transcript of what was said in each meeting so you can look for trends and patterns in that relationship. You have to be able to identify what isn't working so that you can change it and make it work again. Now, I will also tell you that if you really do have strong conflict in the workplace, it's oftentimes good to jot down notes anyway, just so you have them in case the situation needs to be escalated. So I always recommend that if it really is conflict where you just need to make a case to your boss or something like that. The last recommendation that I have is, if at all possible, sometimes the best thing to do is just use humor to diffuse the situation. And when I say humor, I mean true humor. I don't mean snarkiness. I don't mean rudeness. But I don't know if you all remember the 1984 presidential debate between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale. I was like, oh, I don't remember that. But it happened. And
Were you born?
Oh, right, I'm like half these, I'm not even sure, right?
Lauren wasn't born either.
So here's the thing is, so this debate was going on, and I was 5, so I don't really remember exactly what happened. But the story is that Walter Mondale had talked something about President Reagan's age. He's super old, right? But he's oldest person ever, and he wants to be our president. So Ronald Reagan simply said, I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience. And it was a way for them to move on and him to make his point that not appropriate to attack my age, it doesn't matter. So if you're ever in a situation where you can use humor to diffuse, and that's actually the best to use in a group, right, so that you guys can move on, use it, because it can be very effective. So anyhow, I feel like I've talked a ton. I have talked a ton. You guys talk. Can you think of a situation, can you all think of a situation that you, like a recent conflict that you've had, and how you could use something that was mentioned today to help you resolve it?
I never thought of like the reset button, just having a conversation like, you know, what we're doing here, you know, doesn't seem to be working, can we just push reset? Like, that's something I never thought about.
Mm-hmm. And it's just being simple as saying, you know, our working relationship has been difficult, and I want to make it as productive as possible. Would you be okay if we had a brainstorming session to figure out how that happened?